All ready for you.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us for another episode of American Mood Swings. I'm Dr. Janice Morrow. We talk about the brain and all things mental health here. So today's guest is Dr. Robert Weiss. He is a sex addiction specialist. He's worked for, gosh, probably close to 3 decades in this field, helping people around the globe. He's written numerous books. We're going to be talking today. Most of my questions are coming from the Sex Addiction 101. I just thought it was very timely with the rise of Pornhub and OnlyFans and the whole P. Diddy trial. For me, it was quite shocking, like this alternative lifestyle. And nobody talks about sex. Clearly, everyone's interested in sex or all these things wouldn't, but nobody talks about it. So thank you, Dr. Rob. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Um,
And
really grateful to be here. And, unfortunately, I'm here mostly to talk about problems with sex, but I agree with you just in general. It's not just that we talk about it, that we don't talk about it. I used to say we don't teach enough in the schools, and excuse me, but the reality is that it's everywhere. If it amused me actually, because if you go to a movie, like a movie, they still have GP ratings and R ratings. And I'm thinking, but if you go online, what you find is, why do so the culture is really split in that way. But yeah, we need to have meaningful conversations about sex. um it's easy to say, well, they're doing this and I can't believe that, but you really kind of need to understand what it's about. And my PhD is in human sexuality, so ask me about sex, I'm glad to answer. But I think in this case we're here to talk about sex addiction. I will say briefly, I've spent, you said 3 decades? So I've spent 30 years as an active person, clinician working in the field of sex addiction. I've written 9 books about it. I've been all over the world. I've taught for the military and lots of different folks. That was one of them. I've written a lot for partners. But really, it has been my mission and commitment to destigmatize this issue and help people just understand what it's about. So that's why I'm here.
well, thank you. I'll preface this with saying, so I'll be 59 here in a few days. And I can remember when I was 14, sitting on the couch listening to Hugh Hefner in an interview. I always had a lot of respect for him. I just really liked him. Well,
No,
from
no, I won't challenge.
no,
He
no,
was
no,
a
but well, I respect because there were so many things that I thought were much worse than Playboy that I had seen.
yes, yes.
I thought it was very tame compared to what was out there.
Yes. Well, he considered it a cultural contribution. I mean, there was great writing in there, were great interviews in there. So, yeah, it had its place for sure.
But I heard him say that was before I had ever had sex. So I heard him say that sex was the most powerful force on the planet. And I was sitting there thinking, that's crazy. Like, but as I've gotten older, and just seeing so many friends' marriages fall apart, or like powerful people lose their jobs, presidents, and get into trouble. And I think maybe he was right, like something to that. But anyway, I just remember hearing
Well,
him say that.
I can actually comment on that. I mean, from a biological perspective, pure biology, we are here to do, we are here to keep the race going. We're here to have babies. That's why we're here to, become the best of us, whatever that is, for them to become, evolution, right? And so, yes, if we don't mate, we don't carry on the race. So biologically, it is an imperative, kind of like eating. You don't eat, you don't survive. Well, sex has kind of had that same level. So, and if you look at the biology of it and the brain of it, sex is an incredibly powerful stimulant, and all kinds of things go on the brain. So I think culturally, and in terms of our relationships and that thinking half of ours, it's integrated, in so many different ways that are not simply animalistic, but just as a biological perspective. Yeah, we want to have babies, and sex is important to our brain, and that's how we're wired.
All right. Well, let's talk about Sex Addiction 101, your goal of helping people with addictive and compulsive behaviors and realizing it's a chronic emotional disorder, that it's your goal is to like remove the shame and the moral cultural biases. Let's just start with that.
Well, that's a whole bunch of stuff,
I
but
know.
let's see, pick and choose. So my experience with sex addiction has been that it does exist. It is a thing. It is a diagnosis in almost every country except the United States, because you use a different catalog or different way of classifying mental health. But almost everywhere on the earth uses another manual, and in those primary manuals, compulsive sexual behavior disorder is there. So I've spent pretty much my whole professional career. In fact, back in the 90s, I was in this little article in Newsweek about this president who had this stain on somebody's dress, and I was commenting on that and Oprah. And so I've been talking about this for a very long time. Um, but yeah, I want when you think, oh, someone's out of control sexually, they're a sex addict, whatever that means to you. To me, that immediately goes to, well, they're going to be in front of my school, hurting my kids. And, sex addiction is not sex offending. That's a very different thing. Sex addiction is very much grounded in problematic emotional health and trauma issues from the past. I do want to say, though, just from the outset, that everyone's responsible for their behavior. And so I may have horrible things happen to me as a child, and that led to me to end up drinking or end up sexing. But I can't say, oh well, poor me, the trauma happened, so I just get to drink. I mean, I still have to take responsibility. And so a lot of my goal really was to separate what is healthy sexuality from what is problematic sexuality. And then how do you help the people who are really struggling with it as a problem?
Well, that thank you. That leads into the next question. Like what uh it sounds like from your book that there's 10 key signs. When does somebody start to think maybe I need help here? Like, is this just normal that you think about sex all the time, or when is it like a problem? What it sounded like there were 10 key signs of sexual addiction.
One of the things I like to use is healthy, because I don't know what normal is, but I know what healthy is.
Okay. Oh, I
Because
like
people have all kinds of sexual interests. And, it's just not to correct you. It's just, when me, you say, that's a normal person, then you kind of imply, well, everyone should be like that. And I don't, I want healthy people. So, and I don't mean to be too corrective. It's just the way I listen to words very carefully,
no, I
especially with the people I work with, because they say all kinds of things. Um, but in any case, um, I'll tell you what the signs of addiction are that I can do. And, honestly, I'm not sure I remember all 10 of those because I don't remember what I said last week because
okay.
I'm getting to a certain
Yeah,
age where,
yeah.
my keys are almost in the refrigerator at this point. But where are they? But I think so the way I think about addiction, and I think that, and I know the way it's described in the manuals that we look at is, um, well, first of all, it's not about how much sex you have. People have twice a week, people have sex every day. It's kind of like in alcoholism. How many drinks do you have a day? Well, some people have a glass of wine or two, and that's a lot for them. And other people drink themselves to death, but they may both be alcoholics. So we don't determine by how much. Someone might drink whiskey, someone else drinks wine. So I don't define their alcoholism by what they drink. So,
Ah,
in the same way, I don't define sex addiction because you have sex with men or you have sex with women, or even if you're into, you know, some kind of being tied up or whatever, that's up to you. And that's what you would desire. And even people who say, I don't want to be that, that must be an addiction because I can't stop. I don't define addiction by what kind of sex you have or what kind of arousal template you have or how often you do it. Um, we define addiction in a very specific way, which is how does it affect your functionality? So, how does my sexual behavior affect my life goals? Is it deeply, profoundly affecting my relationship? Is it deeply and profoundly interfering with my workplace? Is it deeply and profoundly affecting my family life or career or education? And so, with a porn addict, if I'm spending 6 hours a day looking at porn, probably not going to do real well in the rest of my life, especially a young person who's supposed to be studying or whatever it is, and they're sitting there looking at porn. Someone who's having a lot of indiscriminate sex and maybe affair after affair, they're destroying their relationship. So if your goal in life is to have a healthy relationship or to achieve in business or career or to, begin to enjoy dating or none of those things, functional things are going to happen if you have sex addiction. And so it's also out of control. And what I mean by that is I say, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to go to that massage parlor. I'm not going to go look at more porn. And I do it anyway, you
ah.
know. And again, I go back to alcoholism. The person who gets arrested for drunk driving, the healthy person says, "Oh my goodness, I'll never do that again, and I'll take an Uber, and I'll leave my keys, and they'll never do it again because they know better and they had a consequence." Addicts say things like, "Oh yeah, I got arrested for drunk driving. That's because I was on the wrong street." Or that's kind of a red car. or that's because the police really, investigate that area a lot. In other words, addicts don't take responsibility for their behavior and the problems and then learn from them. They blame other people and other things. So if I'm a sex addict and I'm acting out like a crazy person, I'm going to say, well, my wife or husband doesn't want sex with me. Or, I'm so stressed out about work. In other words, I will say that's the problem rather than looking at my own behavior. When people come to treatment is when their behavior has so profoundly affected their life that they're in a crisis. So the people I see are about to lose their marriage. They've been exposed at the workplace for hitting on people. They've been arrested. And that's when they come and get help.
Talk
Yeah,
let's talk about their you discuss how so much of this is the excitement is in the ritualistic preparations and
right,
fantasy,
right.
and the planning are almost more exciting and consume more of someone's attention than the actual sex.
I'm so glad you asked that question because um, the people I work with may spend 3 days deciding, well, this weekend when my spouse is away and I'm all by myself, and then they may be making phone calls or they're looking up things online to hook up. The actual sex might take 15 minutes or an hour, but it's really about the excitement about what I'm going to do, where I'm going to do it, and who are they going to be. And that neurological change, as you know, it blocks out my ability to think clearly. The more excited, the more emotionally aroused, the more distracted. I'm not really focusing on other things. And so the very planning of it is exciting, the very arousing emotionally, psychologically. My vision narrows. That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm looking forward to. And so it isn't necessarily the sexual act, it's everything. Well, let me say it this way: we call this a behavioral addiction or a process addiction. And I like the word process, or gambling for another example. It's not just about putting my money on the table. It's about the whole process of going to the casino, getting the money out of the bank, listening to the sounds, picking a table that looks hot. All of that is part of the addiction. And it is because they're addicted to the process of it. They're not just addicted to the act, they're addicted to the whole thing because all of that has biological and neurological, excitement that, by the way, isn't necessarily genital, it's emotional.
Okay. One thing I found was interesting is that people joke about it. Like I remember even thinking before when I'd hear this was just years ago, I heard Charlie Sheen, whenever people get in trouble
Mm.
or Tiger Woods, they get themselves into treatment. And I would say to myself, well, who's not addicted when sex is good? But clearly that's not how it is. And you mentioned you talk about how it's really not fun. Addiction's not fun. People might think it's fun, but when you look at all the problems, can you go into that a little bit and
Well,
elaborate? Like,
drinking is fun. I go to the casino once a year with my $100. That's fun. Um, I don't, eating is fun and I enjoy it. It's essential. But when those behaviors run off the rails and they become self and other destructive. So that's what makes it hard is sex is fun. Sex is wonderful. How could that be an addiction? Well, if it's an addiction, it means that you are carrying out in ways that are self-destructive, destructive to others, and you don't seem able to learn from your consequences. This terrible thing happened. What am I thinking? My wife is leaving. I've destroyed my family relationships. I need to work on that. I'll never do it again. And of course they do. And so that whole idea of the consequences do not change my decisions. If I don't know, if I went to a strip club as a part of a bachelor party, let's say. And I did that once or twice, a couple of bachelor parties, and it proved to be devastating to my spouse or whatever. I'd probably say, wow, that's not something I should do again. That was really immature of me. That was, something I wasn't really thinking would harm our relationship. It's just some kind of a guy thing or whatever. But if I continue to do it over and over again and over again, um, in fact, I'll give you a little story. One of the things I remember a man telling me that he would take he was a salesman. He would take the people he sold things to a strip club. That's what they wanted to do there for another country, and they wanted a strip club. And he would go with them, and they spend an hour. And I'm not sure. I don't quite understand the idea of hanging out in a strip club with a bunch of guys. To get well, anyway. That's not my issue. I don't go to strip clubs, but nonetheless. He will go with them. That's what they want to do. He takes them for an hour and a half. Great. They leave. They go back to the hotel. They go up to their floor, and he presses the down button, and he goes back to the strip club because he's not just there to entertain people or
uh,
have a little bit of fun. He's there to lose himself. And you mentioned emotional stabilization, distraction. For me, in the work I do, it's not the pursuit of sex. It's the pursuit of disappearing. It's the pursuit of losing everything that might be on my mind and singularly focusing on this. It's a way to distract myself from difficult emotions. It's a way to calm myself. It's a way to feel a sense of control. And I don't think that's different for any addiction. You might look at someone and say, you feel better because you drink half a gallon of vodka? Well, yeah, I do. You might look at them and say, well, I don't think that makes any sense. But for me, it's calming. It's makes me feel contained. So healthy behaviors, when they run off the rails, become addictions for some people. Now, you might be lonely and your partner died, and you might have more sex during a period of time. You're grieving, but the people I work with is consistency throughout their life in one way or the other. They're involved in very compulsive patterns of sexual behavior. By the way, that could be porn. That could be anonymous sex. That could be going to strip clubs and bars. That could be OnlyFans or some of those kinds of hookups, Grinder. They can be affairs, one after another. Um, in fact, I'll say one more thing because I love talking, as you don't know. Um, so I'll have a man come in to treatment. He says, my problem is I just don't know whether it should be my wife or the girlfriend, my wife or the girlfriend. And I usually say to him, I think that's time you should spend alone because you don't know what you want. But when I start pursuing the discussion about the girlfriend, he said, well, I have been with a couple of prostitutes while I was seeing her. And actually, there's a couple other women I'm interested in. So he's got backup. So the issue is not him, her, or her. It's the minute he gets in that next relationship, guess what's going to happen? And women I know who have started a relationship, an affair, and then they find out 5 years later, her husband's having an affair. And I think, well, you know, why would you think he wouldn't do this again? And so, um, yeah, I'll stop it there.
I was curious what you thought. I don't have to keep it in the interview of prostitution because I've always kind of been a fan of and I grew up a devout Mormon and I still would identify as Mormon, but I think it should be legal and most people don't. I feel like I just don't think I don't like the government involved. But do you think I had a one of my patients many years ago? It was around the time of that Kobe Bryant got caught cheating early on. He was like
Right.
21. He had just signed his $100 million. And this gentleman was in my office, so we were talking about it because it was very high profile. And he said, he was telling me how hard it is for men to be monogamous. They're not wired. And he's like, that's why the best thing is prostitution because you just go, it's a business transaction and it's not a relationship. And I just had never had anyone be so blunt and say it, put it like that. But I've just always, I think it should be legal, but most people don't. I was curious.
So I think this is a really good question. It's not my job to decide what's legal or not. It's not my job to say, I mean, it is my job to say looking at children is not okay, looking at underage is not okay, non-consensual behavior is not okay. But in terms of what the culture decides, well, these images are okay or these aren't, or going to these places or people selling themselves for sex. My job is to help people have a problem. My job is not to have judgment about the culture or so. And even if I did, I'm not going to reveal that to you. I'm not going to talk about it in my work because that's just my decision. That's what works for me. But I'm there to help the persons in front of me. And I'm going to help them with the problem that they have. The larger judgments I leave to politics and religion. And my job is to be a therapist and help people the best way I can. And judgment, bringing moral judgment, ethical judgment, relational judgment, religious judgment, whatever you want to call it, into the therapy is to really give the client um, the inability to talk about something they're struggling with. They're already judging themselves
Mm.
deeply. If they think I'm judging them, they're going to lose hope for healing. And I can't help them.
Okay. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that the set is that sex addiction. I never thought about it till I read your book. Unlike other things, whether it was alcohol or gambling, because you've mentioned those a couple times, the goal would be probably
Mm.
100% abstinence. Let's just
Hmm.
or smoking, whatever you're addicted to, alcohol, probably better not to drink in moderation, just walk away altogether. But sex is very different because it's such a strong, desire and
I
need.
want people to have sex. They should enjoy sex, right? Eliminating sex is not the goal.
Yeah.
So I think to speak to your question, um, I can enjoy my life without having another drink. I can enjoy my life without going to the casino again. I can enjoy my life without I don't know what are some other many other addictions. I But when it comes to healthy behavior like eating or sex, I don't obviously can't stop eating, and I don't want people to stop engaging in healthy sexuality. So you're right, sobriety and healing, I absolutely believe in every other addiction is abstinence. I don't drink anymore. I don't do drugs anymore. I don't go to the casino. I don't go to fantasy football, all of that kind of stuff. But you're right, with things that are more naturally occurring behaviors that healthy people engage in, it's more about creating boundaries. It's more about, I'm also sat down with someone to say, what's important to you? Well, I want to have a good relationship with my spouse, my wife. Okay, so let's look at what sexual behaviors are working against that. Well, I'm cheating and I'm seeing sex workers. I'm looking at porn 7 hours a day. Okay, that's the sexuality we need to eliminate. Not, by the way, for other people. Some people may be perfectly fine going to those places. That's why I don't have judgment or looking at porn. But for you, some people are fine drinking, but for the alcoholic, it's not okay. And so for the sex addict, there are certain things that they can't do because it destroys what's important to them. It destroys their work. It destroys their education. It's ruining their relationship. Am I telling them to stop having sex? No. I'm telling them that to stop having sex that is destroying their lives and taking them away from their goals. And so we literally sit down and say, what is your sobriety? Well, it will be not doing these things because those are the things that are self-destructive and become addictive. What is healthy for you? Well, I can do this with a partner. I can do this while I'm dating. Great. Those are things that we can, give a big goal to start to. But once you start down that road of problem behaviors that you've engaged in before, it's a slippery slope, and you're going to end up right back where you were. So yeah, it's about boundaries rather than abstinence.
Okay. Can we talk about external triggers versus internal triggers and differentiate for people I'd never really had heard those terms until
Well, sure. I mean, I think they're kind of tied together. In other words, something happens in the outside world. I'll give you an example. I had a client who was deeply abandoned by his mother when he was a child. His mother was in and out in other relationships, from age of 2 or 3. So here's this woman that he grew up deeply depending on, who, as anyone would with their mother, and she would disappear a lot. So he told me he was sitting in therapy 30 years later, and his therapist, he said, he was sitting in the waiting room. He said, we have an appointment today. And he texted her. She said, no, you canceled the other things to do, which was true. And he told me immediately all he wanted to do was have sex with other people. He thought, okay, I've got a free hour. Therapy isn't happening. So where can I go? Who can I pick up? Who can I get on the phone? And I understand from my perspective that external experience, which is that woman didn't show up, triggered within him these deep feelings of being abandoned and neglected. And his way of soothing and comforting himself was unhealthy. So he went out looking, well, he didn't. He knew how to handle it and he reached out for help. But nonetheless, there is that automatic response to people who have trauma. Some things trigger them to act out. But then there's also the other part, which is it feels good, and if I'm feeling bad, I know sex is going to make me feel better. I think one of the differences is between a healthy addict and between a healthy person and addict is if I'm having a really bad day and terrible things have happened to me, my logical conclusion isn't to go to a strip club. My logical conclusion is to go to a massage parlor. My logical conclusion is to call a friend. My logical conclusion, I'm having a bad day, go for a walk, play with the dog, go do something fun, yell and scream. But the idea that the logical conclusion for me to deal with difficult feelings and experiences is to go be sexual or to go drink or to go, that's an addict solution. You can be in a deeply unhappy marriage with no sex, or your spouse has gained 400 pounds. You can leave them. You can go to therapy. You can, find other things that have deep meaning to you and see your marriage as a companionship or whatever that is. But to blame that partner and say, you know what, they're so this and they're so that, that I deserve to be able to have sex in this way. And by the way, I don't tell my spouse, then that's what we're looking to addiction. The words I think of there are entitlement. I deserve it, and I've been working so hard. I've been doing stuff I get whined at, complained at so often. And so I get to have it. And then it's the externalization, which is because they're doing this to me or because I am having these problems rather than I'm responsible for my behavior. And listen, if you want to choose the sex, go ahead and choose the sex. Good for you. I'll tell you one more thing because I kind of love this story. I love my stories. So, when I used to do outpatient therapy, because I run a treatment center now, and I would have a client who would come and say, "Look, the problem is porn. It's not really seeing sex workers. I mean, my wife doesn't know about that, and I don't see what she doesn't know won't hurt her. And so, I don't see why that's a problem. And would it be okay if I went and saw a sex worker today?" And I said, "Look, you absolutely go have a good time. You just have to ask your wife first. And if it's okay with her, it's okay with me." Because one of the deepest and most powerful triggers for addicts is secrecy. They lie to their spouses, they lie to themselves, they gaslight, they manipulate, they seduce. And all of that keeps them from looking at the reality of what they're actually doing.
Okay. Do you think, it seems to me that people have a really hard time talking to their spouse about sex, period. That's just an observation. People can't talk to their kids. They don't, they're unhappy with what's going on sexually with their spouse and they cannot talk about it. And I think, well, why not if it's your spouse? But many people seem to not
Well,
be able to, or this is
um,
what I'm
I
thinking
would say
about.
there's a lot of things that people don't talk to each other about. Couples hide things from each other. They don't say things to each other. They don't know how to articulate them. They're afraid of the response. So I wouldn't say that it's specific to sex that people don't talk about their emotions or their challenges. It's harder because it's so personal and so private and how our culture kind of looks at it in many ways. But um, it's not about not talking. I want to say there's double negative. It is about not talking about things. It's about hiding things. It's one thing I'm uncomfortable with their sex life and nor having as often as I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about it with them. Okay, see a therapist, read a book, take a court, do whatever it takes, go to a couples workshop. But I am doing all of this and I'm deliberately keeping it from my spouse, the sexual behavior, because I know that if they found out, I'd have to stop or I'd be in trouble. That's addictive behavior. I'll tell you what the backbone of any relationship is. I've learned this in 30 years of doing practice and in my own. The number one backbone of a relationship is trust, bar none. If, I may love you, but if I know every time you go out the door, you're going to do things that are going to hurt me, and I can't trust that you have my back, well, then what is our relationship about? If I can't trust that you're going to go spend every penny we have, if I can't trust you're going to end up in jail because you're drinking, if I can't trust that every time you go to the house, you might be going to, meet your affair partner and then do drugs. If I can't trust you, then loving you is painful and frightening. So to me, trust is the thing. I love you. Love is great, but love is behavior. And I love you, but you're doing things that harm me and are not trustworthy. I really have to question the value of that relationship in my life.
Wow.
Trust,
Okay.
trust,
Very cool.
trust.
I can't say that I'm the most trusting person. Let's talk
Well,
about,
well, well, but that's because of your life experiences, and that's because of your, where how you look at relationships, and you may choose somebody very carefully because of your past issues with trust or what it is for you. Um, so let's talk about trust in a non-sexual setting. Okay, so I have an employee, and we have a little petty cash box at work. And I noticed one morning I come in at work, and this employee has been there early in the petty cash box. I see it open, and there's money missing. So we have a discussion about that. And for whatever reason, I say, you know what? You're just starting out. You're really struggling. You should have asked if you needed money. I would have helped you. And I'll never do it again. Fine. I'm going to trust you. Now, 2 years later, if that person walks in the office and they see the same person sitting in front of the safety deposit bar or the cash box with it open, what do you think they're going to think? They're going to go right back to, I don't trust you because you've done this before and now you might be doing it again. So I will never be able to come in the office early and see that person in the cash box and not think that, because once you've broken my trust, I can never look at you in the same way. It doesn't mean I won't have you in my life, and I think this in marriages in particular. There is, as there should be, a hopeful belief that you're going to be honest with me. We're going to have a meaningful relationship based on that honesty. Once you find out that I've been hooking up online, once you find out that I've been having an affair, you'll never look at me the same way again. That relationship as you knew it will never be the same again. It'll be different, But I will never have that naive sense that, especially with people who are sex addicts, I will never have that naive sense as a partner that you're going to go out there in the world and that you would never do something to hurt me, because now I know you've done it hundreds of times. By the way, I do want to speak to that. Sex addicts, we're not talking about an affair or a few trips to here or there. We're talking about repeated, compulsive behaviors that go over long periods of time. So, I break up with someone or I have a miserable relationship and I cheat, or I decide to have an affair for whatever reasons, that's someone who's got problems. They've got issues. They're immature. They don't know how to deal with their feelings about relationships. They're lonely. But the people I work with are destroying everything that's important to them because of their repeated patterns of sexual behavior throughout their life, and they can't stop.
Wow. The whole trust thing, it's so funny. I wouldn't even say there's been a lot of cheating and romantic, but if someone lies to me, like I feel like it's a horrible way to start. This just came up a couple, so minor, but to me I do real estate now too. So somebody had approached me about a commercial real estate deal. It's just something off topic, but I I called someone I know in my office who does commercial. I was referred to him to help me. I've never done a commercial deal. But anyway, he hadn't returned my calls. Finally, I called him back like a third time and he's like, "Oh, I tried calling you a few times." We just moved forward. But after I hung up the phone, I thought he didn't. I've been by my phone all day. There's no, you can tell when someone's tried to call you.
Right.
But I thought like I don't even know if I want to work with him. I feel like finding because if he's lying about something so stupid, like just say I got busy rather than like
Mm.
to your point on trust. I
Well, I want to say something about that because that is the restorative. That is what is restorative. And that's what destroys. So if I've been acting out, going out, staying late at work and I'm just working hard and I'm having an affair with the person I work with. If I've been coming home late because I'm stopping off for this sexual experience, if I lock myself in the office at home and I'm looking at porn, for a long period of time. So when I'm working with someone who has betrayed a relationship and they have broken trust in that relationship, there is only one source of healing, and it certainly isn't anything I say. It's what I do. So I commit to you, I'm going to go to support groups. I commit you that I'm going to be completely honest. I commit to you that I'm going to um, see a therapist about this or whatever. Go to Dr. Weiss's treatment center. Whatever it is that I need to do, I'm going to stop this behavior. Um, that's when the trust alert goes off for the spouses I work with, because then trust is about everything. And I had a man, this is true story. His wife and he were doing pretty good. He had been working on his recovery. They'd been beginning to heal this relationship. And and one day she said, please take out the trash this morning. It's very important to me. It's kind of getting stinky. They're coming today for the trash. I said, okay, absolutely. Well, he got home and she got home and he realized he hadn't taken the trash out. So she said to him when she got home, you took the trash out, right? And he said, oh, absolutely. And he had. So she's like in their bathroom washing her hands, and she looks out on the street and she sees her husband sneaking the trash out to the sidewalk, hoping that she isn't looking. This is a true story. And she came out and said, I can't be married to you anymore. I can't do this. And he said, well, what? It was just the trash. And she said, if I can't trust you to tell me that you didn't take the trash out, how can I ever trust you that you're having an affair or you're doing anything that you say when you go out of this house? And so trust is assumed in some ways or hoped for, but when it is broken in that way, then even the littlest things, I have to trust everything that you say and everything you do. And by the way, I may be dishonest with you. That'll happen, but my job as a healthy partner is to come back and say, you know what? I wasn't honest the other day. That actually is more meaningful, is if I'm willing to come forward and say, you know what? I didn't want to bring this up. I thought that would be upsetting to you. But the bottom line is what's more important to me is that we are closer because I'm honest with you. So let me tell you, I wasn't honest about that. Now, you, my spouse, you're not going to like that. You're not like that I did. You're not going to like that I lied to you or hid it. But some party's going to say, huh, now I'm hearing the truth. Now I'm understanding what's going on. I think for a lot of spouses, part of the most devastating thing is I don't know what the heck's going on. And this is deeply from a betrayed spouse, I just want to know what's going on. We've been married for 20 years and I've been living my life under this assumption. And all of a sudden I find out that this happened. Well, what else happened? And what else happened? What has been the premise that I live my life based on this? Now we're in free fall because I learned about that.
Mm.
And I don't trust you. Maybe there's more, and then there's more. And ultimately, there isn't going to be a relationship unless that person who wants to heal says, I'm willing to come forward and tell the truth.
Okay. Yeah, it feels so if someone's lying early on in a relationship, like where do you go from there? Like to me, anyway,
Well, I like what you said because I got to tell you, if I have a plumber, and this is absolutely, I learned this, right? If I have someone come over to work on my roof, right, and they say, I'll be there on Thursday, and then they come on Thursday and say, I'm sorry, I can't make it. And then Friday, they don't answer the phone. I'm not going to hire them because I think, well, if they're not, this is like you, if they're not answering the phone and they're not responding in the beginning of the relationship, what is it going to end up being? I just think there are a lot of people who, because of their own damage, they miss those signs.
yeah,
You know,
just
well, I love him. I know that he's a heroin addict. He's still married, but he's so sweet to me. You know, those kinds of things, we call love addiction, if you will.
okay. Well, I'd love to you talk about tolerance and how you're building. And Chris Rock, first time I really heard someone talk about it was a few years ago, one of his earlier specials, because he talks about that was one of the contributing factors of his divorce. And he had had a couple affairs and he got addicted to porn. And he said how it basically desensitized him, but you constantly end up needing more. Like he does it much funnier than me because he's a comedian, but like let's say
Yeah,
you like this and now you need to throw this on top of it, and then
right.
months goes by and it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder what it takes. And you mentioned this in your book, The Tolerance. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I think that tolerance can come in two forms, and one is time. So maybe maybe I was really into porn and it became problematic. And I went from looking at it an hour a week to 3 hours a week. From then it was 2 hours a night and so the escalation is in how much time. I used to hunt around and search for a sex worker for half a day or an hour. It didn't happen. Now I'm looking every day. And
Wow.
so the tolerance is the more I do, the more I want to do. And let's not for sex. Nothing. Let's not forget. Sex is fun. Sex is enjoyable. And I have to remind my clients, you can't say it wasn't fun. You can't say you didn't enjoy the act or it's the other way that tolerance or people escalate their behavior is what they're doing. I'm looking at images of women. Now I'm looking at images of three women. Now I'm looking at images with women with these people and those people. And all of a sudden, now I will say that does not necessarily in any way mean they're going to cross a boundary into illegal behavior or they're going to start looking at kids, whatever that is. I mean, I think that is a fear that if they're doing this, then they're going to do that. The truth is doesn't turn me on. I'm not going to look at it. So I may look at things hundreds of times, but my escalation is going to be within the realm of things that actually arouse me. um, it's just going to be more and more and more, and yeah, it is to achieve the same result, because their brains, as you know, they adapt, and what used to be a lot all of a sudden becomes normal, and then I need more. And that's very much true for an addict, because we're not looking for sex. Addicts are looking, and I said we because I started out with this issue for sure. There's a reason that motivated me, one of them.
Oh,
Um, but we're not looking for the sex. We're looking to escape. So if I have emotionally difficult feelings and I can lose myself for 3 hours rather than two, if I can disappear from slights rather than major hurts, the better I feel, the more cut off I am, but the better I feel. By the way, I should say why I'm in the field. One is that addictive behavior was destroying my life in terms of not being able to have a relationship. There was no way I was going to have a meaningful relationship while I was doing all of the acting out I was doing. And the other, just in my lifetime, was AIDS and HIV, because I knew that people were dying because they had compulsive sexual behavior and they couldn't stop, some of them, and no one helped explain to them what that was. And they would make decisions, I'm not going to do it, and they would do it anyway. And then they would do it again. And they put their lives at risk, they put other people's lives at risk. And I thought, my goodness, I can help with this. And so I actually wrote the first book and only book, I think, for gay men who have sex addiction. And that's a book called Cruise Control. And I mention it particularly because gay men live in a different culture. They live in a much more permissive sexual culture than the than your average traditional heterosexual couple. And therefore, you know, what is the difference between being a guy who has a lot of sex as a part of my sort of culture and a guy who's a sex addict? Those are things that had to be articulated. And so I wrote about that.
Okay. Oh, well, I'll definitely put that in here.
Add
Maybe.
it to the nine other books. You can
Yeah.
saw what I became compulsive about, right? How I avoided my life. I just
Well,
wrote. Hmm.
so we hadn't really touched on it, but you talk about it in your book and you just mentioned your own personal experience. You definitely share that a lot of this comes from trauma, a lot of
Mhm.
addictive behaviors, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, I will say that there's biological propensity for addiction. We know, excuse me, we know with alcoholism now that there are, you can see on the DNA chains where someone who has a propensity for alcoholism, where that falls. Now, I would never be an alcoholic because my body metabolizes alcohol quickly. That's in my DNA, which means if I have half of a bottle or even 3 glasses of wine or a glass of wine, I get a headache, I get tired. That alcohol goes through me very quickly, and I just want to go to sleep. Or, but someone whose DNA means they metabolize alcohol slowly, they can drink for hours and hours and hours, and they don't have the same effect. So some people are biologically have the propensity for depression. Some people have a propensity for anxiety. Some people have a propensity for addiction. So you have to have that piece. There has to be something about your about the way you're biologically organized. But the other piece is trauma. And and it doesn't mean they're being sexually abused. I think it's very important because people say, oh, sexual abuse. Maybe some of my clients have been sexually abused, but a lot of sexually abused people have not become sex addicts. Um, I could describe the different kinds of trauma that leave men in particular becoming sex addicts. And very briefly, it has to do with being used by a parent. You know, my mom was mentally ill and she wasn't able to hold herself up emotionally or feel good about herself in the world, but she had this son, me, and I was the light of her life. And so she felt badly about herself, she could point to me. If she needed help and support, she used me. I became back her de facto boyfriend. And so and that is almost the repetitive, repeated experience I have of male sex addicts is they somehow learned that how they would feel good about themselves was doing whatever someone else needed rather than being there and learning about themselves. So, of course, they would learn that when I go out there and I'm desired, when I go out there and I'm pleased or someone wants to be with me, well, that's how I get rewarded. And so there isn't you know, I'm talking way too much about this. Let me just skip that part and let me say more directly. Trauma beyond the biological, trauma is absolutely is drives addiction. And you can say it in the simplest way that people who are traumatized, they never learned how to deal with things in a healthy way. They never learned how to manage their feelings. You know, when you're being hit all the time, you don't learn how to speak up for yourself. You don't learn that your anger is okay. What you learn is when you're upset, you go hide. When you're upset, bad things are going to happen. So learn all kinds of patterns to survive really difficult experiences growing up. And the patterns that my men, mostly I work with men, have experienced are the kinds that leave them terrified of getting close to someone. They're deeply frightened of intimacy. And actually, what I would call sex addiction is it's an intimacy disorder. I have my loving, connected family world over here. And then I have my sex and my excitement, my intensity over there, and they're completely separate.
Wow.
Um, so, and a dual life, a compartmentalized life is what defines addiction in some ways.
Wow, very interesting. Is that you mentioned a word called limerence in your book
Mhm.
versus long-term intimacy. Is that along those lines? What is limerence again?
Well, I love the biological. So I will say that limerence is a naturally occurring biological experience where we meet someone and we fall in love and everything's like moonbeams and sunlight and we're releasing lots of oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone, and we can't stop thinking about them. We talk about it all the time. It's hearts and flowers. That is meant to be. That is there in an experience of bonding. That is the experience, honestly, biologically, so that when and if we have babies, that we will be bonded together and that I will be there to be that we will be in a united unit because we've had this love and this intensity at the beginning. But that can't continue. What hopefully comes out of that intensity is a deeper appreciation for each other, a deeper sense that there is something more important than that, and that actually that was the start of a much deeper connection and relationship. However, it feels really good and it's really exciting. And it's really so I will work with clients who say, I keep meeting people, but then I fall out of love with them. And what they're chasing is the excitement of the early part of the relationship. But when the real intimacy comes along, when I have to see you truly who you are, and you have to begin to see me truly who you are, because limerence is like being in a love fog. And when that fog begins to clear and it becomes a meaningful relationship, I run. And that's what the people I work with. Now, some of them will run into a next relationship. Some of them will simply be in the relationship they're in and run to all kinds of other behavior they just don't tell their partner, and they split their lives in half. This is an intimacy disorder for sure.
All right. I wanted to talk about porn-induced dysfunction because I've heard people say like, oh, they're not going to be able to even find their wives or girlfriends or husbands stimulating more. Could we talk a little bit about that? The porn-induced
Sure.
sexual.
I'm trying to think of a metaphor with food. I'm thinking, well, if I eat cheesecake all the time, broccoli's not going to be that interesting. And and so what I mean by that is if I am so in a
Broccoli is never interesting.
I like broccoli.
Okay.
Um, so but that this is not our talk show about food, but we'll get there. Um,
Right.
if I am constantly so let's talk about relationship sex, and we'll talk about that kind of dysfunction. People in relationships will have less and less sex. They'll be less and less interested in sex if they're looking a lot of porn because they are used to new stimulation all the time. And by the way, the two things that turn men on the most are visual, we're very visual, and new stimulation. So of course we love that new hot person's walking down the street and we're thinking, oh, it's going to be really exciting to have sex with them. That's how our brains work. Now there is again the part of us that says, well, that would be nice, but I'm in a relationship, a healthy person. I'm in a relationship, I matter to them, that looks good, but I'm not going to go do that. Okay. Um, the addict is going to not engage and they won't be able to have that kind of thinking. They will simply jump into the behavior. So and in a relationship, I'm going to become less and less interested in sex with my partner because they're just not as arousing as what I'm used to looking at. I will say to someone, you've seen that butt before 300 times. It's not going to be like that brand new person. You've seen that thing before. And so intimacy and relationship intimacy is and connection and love and touching. And that's the sexuality comes out of that over time rather than this, oh, new, hot, exciting, whatever that is. So in a relationship, my sexual interest will diminish. If you're single, and I find this with a lot of young men, there are a couple of things that happen. Um, there was a study done in Japan not that long ago because they have a declining population and they need more babies. And they did a lot of research about that. And what they found out was a lot of young men would say, and I can find the study for you, both the numbers, but about 70% of them said, well, one of the reasons I wouldn't have sex is why bother? I can hang out with my friends, I can go gaming, I can look at porn if I want. If I ask somebody out, maybe they want to have sex with me. Maybe I'd have to like get to, I'd have to take them to dinner. So this way I can hang out at home, I can be with my friends, I can be on my own. I don't have to struggle with all of that. I can just have sex. And by the way, as we move into AI, as we move into virtual reality, it's going to be less and less interesting to go out and pick somebody up because, and I've had these men. So there is a declining birth population in part because men simply aren't going out and looking for sex in the same ways that they did before. When you talk about the actual arousal process, um, if I am constantly stimulating myself with incredibly powerful images, when I meet somebody and I start being interested in them, well, they'll never be that. So if what I have been aroused by and introduced by is intense, image after image, hour after hour, person after person, whatever that is, that a regular person or my boyfriend or girlfriend is just not going to be that interesting, and I will find myself not able to become aroused with them, not able to get an erection, not able to pursue that because they don't bring that intensity that all of that looks like and brings me. I will say that this is not a permanent condition. If you stop looking at the porn over time, you will begin to re-engage with relational, intimate, pursuit of sex and dating, um, based on what's going on between you and that other person. And you will get aroused and you will have engagement that is sexually exciting, but not if you're looking at porn all day long. It's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
Um, I will also say, I want to say about some younger folks, as younger men in particular, they don't have a lot of experience dating. They don't have a lot of experience. One of the reasons, I don't know about you, but one of the reasons I went out and had sex, well, one of the reasons I would date, one of the reasons I would spend time with people who I was romantically interested in is I wanted to have sex. I, I'll be a guy, I'll be honest. Sometimes I loved you, sometimes I cared about you, sometimes I just thought, well, maybe I'd go to the movies, get laid, but just what it was. But if you're having a lot of sex without having to pursue that or look for it, maybe you've never had the experience. I work with people who've had incredible amounts of sexual experiences in porn, but they've never held someone's hand. They've
Oh,
never asked someone out for a date. They have never been in physical. I've had men say, and please excuse the comment, well, women smell funny and they don't want to have sex with me right away. And so why would I bother? And so they don't know how. You have to understand that when a healthy person perhaps is in high school, they are in sports, they are hanging out at the club afterward, they're going out with friends in the evening. Well, if I'm a porn addict, I'm looking at porn every night. I'm not going out with other people. High school's hard. Those young experiences are difficult. Building relationships, going dating, getting to know someone, getting to sexuality, you risk being rejected. You risk not being a part of. There's so many risks and challenges, but in that you learn how to have a relationship. You learn how to date. But if you're 23 years old and you've done nothing basically look at porn, well, then going out there and trying some of these experiences is not something you've had much experience with. And simply that alone leaves people wanting to stay home and avoid something that's very healthy and important for us.
wow. Well, I wanted to talk about betrayal trauma and when somebody comes into your office, because some people seem to be able to work through infidelity and other people. I know many of my friends, they're like, that would be a deal breaker. I'd love
Oh,
to.
I want to say something about that.
Yeah.
Just people say things are deal breakers until they actually happen.
Okay. Okay.
If they did that to me, I would absolutely, well, they did. Well, so what you feel might be true if something happens is not necessarily what you're going to do when you love somebody. Just to say, now your neighbor will say, oh my God, why is she staying with him? When she should know better. But I would say, well, but she's not asked, she doesn't have to leave her husband. She doesn't have to destroy her family. So it's easy to stand on the outside and say, why aren't you? But when you're actually in it, it's a lot harder to say, well, I'm just going to walk away from this person. But anyway, I interrupted your question because
Oh,
I
I
like
just,
want to jump on questions with questions.
yeah, let's talk about betrayal trauma and and then I'd love to just, I guess, the last whatever time we have, talk about the treatment,
Healing. Let's talk
healing,
about healing.
healing,
Um,
the boundary plans, various types of treatments, all these kind of.
sure. Um, so betrayal trauma is when I trust you that you're going to be, when we say just us and we commit to just us, and I believe it's just us. Um, when you violate that trust, I don't think men understand this really in the same way that women experience breaking of trust in a very different way.
Hmm.
A guy might go to a strip club and say, "Well, I don't want to tell her because she's been upset with me." But if he did tell her, she might say, "You've ruined my life. I'll never trust you again. How can I feel safe when you?" So the idea of relationship,
Interesting.
because of how men and women perceive relationships and experience relationships, what a man might consider as a minor infraction to a woman might be devastating. And especially when and I have many relationships. We've been married 30 years. We've been together 15 years. And I picked up your phone and I found all of this and all of that. And so
Interesting.
what do you do with that? You lose your mind. Well, what else has happened? And I know what's happened. And I might start my own addictive behaviors. Well, now I'm going to start a drink, or I'm yelling all the time, or I become someone that I don't want to be. And I think for a long time, therapists looked at partners as sex addicts and say, oh, well, they're just crazy people. I mean, look at all this stuff they do. And they're yelling, they're screaming, they're gaining weight. They're not taking care of themselves. They're nagging all the time, which by the way, gives the addict an excuse to say, well, look at her. I mean, or him. Why wouldn't you? But the bottom line is, why are they in that place? And in my mind, something died. I am deeply attached to you. And if you die, my attachment is broken and I'm going to grieve it and mourn it. If we are together and you fail in such a meaningful way, um, I'm going to be devastated emotionally. And that emotional devastation is going to play out in my looking like a crazy person. I'm going to go through everything on your phone. I'm going to look at every credit card you've ever had. I'm going to follow, I'm going to have a tracker on your phone. And
Oh,
well, that happens all the time with the clients I work with because I simply want to know what's going on in my life. And this is the plea that I give spouses over and over again. I just want to know. I just want to know. Tell me what's been going on because it's my life. And you've taken the opportunity I had to live my life the way I wanted to live it by all these lies and secrets and running your own show. Um, so yeah, the spouses. And by the way, I wrote a book called Out of the Doghouse, my best-selling book, Out of the Doghouse, a relationship saving guide for men caught cheating. Out of the Doghouse, a relationship saving guide for men. A relationship saving guide for men caught cheating. I wish I'd rewritten that subtitle. The reason is that men simply don't understand. I think even in a non-addictive relationship, well, if I give you flowers, we'll go out, I'll take you on vacation. It's been 3 months. Why aren't you over this? Well, no, I mean, I just cheated. It's not like I don't love you. I don't think most understand that that's not going to work. That what that partner wants is empathy and compassion and insight and understanding. All the gifts in the world are not going to make up for your breaking my heart, if you will. And men are waiting for women to get over it, and what's the big deal? Which we will often say. And a woman is saying, well, why aren't you giving me the time to sit with this? And it could take a year for me to work through this kind of pain. So yeah, I do think that, and I will make this biological for the most part, because men think about sex, no matter how much feminism said, women can be just like men. You don't release hormones like I do. You don't have testosterone. You don't see a lot of female sex offenders in prison. You don't see a lot of women committing violent crimes in prison. You don't see groups of men, of women hanging out in the street corner saying, hey, babe, hot butt, because we're built differently and we're driven differently around sexuality. So the way you may perceive the hurt in a relationship and what it means to you in terms of emotional sexual violation, whatever that is, will be very different than the way a man looks at it. And that makes it even harder for, as I said, someone who's even had an affair to turn around and say, oh my God, at what I've done to you, because it may not feel that way to us. For a woman, it might feel like you've ruined my life. You've devastated everything we had. And how could you do that? A man mischeated on might think, well, wasn't I hot enough in bed? Didn't I bring in enough money? It's much more about me as a man rather the entirety of everything that we've ever shared. Mars versus Venus.
interesting.
But betrayal trauma is a meaningful, real thing. People need support for it. Um, the difference with treating an addict and treating a partner or spouse is addicts need containment, confrontation, direction, accountability. They need to be held to a new standard of living and a different way of living. The partners need support, nurturing, comfort, self-care. They have been devastated. And by the way, it's not just what happened. If you look back over time, that person's been less and less intimate. And then they find out things like, you mean we went on our honeymoon and you did this? You mean I was in the hospital having a baby and you did that? And then it becomes you're smiling. Actually,
Yeah,
a lot of the,
I've heard stories like that. Yeah.
especially the giving birth part, because the truth is if it's a man, he's whatever his issues are, he's overwhelmed with fear about being a father, whatever it is. Well, what do my clients do when they're overwhelmed with feelings? They go to a sex club. They hire a sex worker. This is how, as a sex addict, I manage and tolerate feelings that I don't know how to manage and tolerate. And then a spouse says, how could you be doing this when we're on a vacation, whatever? Well, of course I would be doing that because I'm having all these feelings. Not, how could you love me and do this anyway? Well, to be honest, and this is really true, it didn't have anything to do with you. In fact, I worked really hard to not think about how it would affect you. But the truth is, I'm not out. I'll blame you. I'll say you're too this, you're too that. But the truth is, I'm out there doing this because I'm broken. And there's something wrong with me, a chronic emotional illness that I need to work on. But of course, the spouse is going to make it personal. How could you not? Alcoholism, if I drink like a serious alcoholic, I don't think in the same way you're gonna say, maybe you don't love me. You might say if you love me, you stop drinking. But the feelings about your alcoholism would be very different than you've been cheating on me with all these people, because that's so much more personal. And so it has to be about me. And therefore, the violation is so much more difficult to heal from.
Well, let's talk about healing and like what can
Okay.
people expect when they get involved in your treatment programs and seeking integrity. How does one get involved and what does it entail?
Well, I can talk seeking integrity because I'm really proud of some of the things we do, and I'll mention it, but I just want to mention in a general way. Um, Change is about not trying to do it by yourself. Change is about connecting with other people who have the same problem. Healing is about looking at people who've been working on this for a while and saying, oh, that's who I want to be like. How did they get there? This is why the 12-step programs in my mind are extremely important, because they build community and they provide a place for me to go to. I don't have to pay for therapy. I don't have to go see a specialist. Maybe I can't. Maybe I don't have insurance. I don't have the time, but I can go to one of those support groups and someone will come sleep on my couch to make sure I don't go out that night,
Oh, interesting.
because
Yeah.
that's the kind of emo they will ask me to call them every hour to make sure that I don't, because if you do that for me, I'm going to do that for you. Education, groups, my podcast, we have over 2 million downloads. Sex, love, and addiction, right? Got to mention that, sex, love, and addiction. We have two, by the way, mostly it's women who listen to it and then they sit their husbands down and say, you're going to effing listen to this. But in any case, and of course, women cheat too, for sure. And I've opened programs for women who have these issues, different focus. But in any case, uh, recovery and healing doesn't have to be, can be all kinds of things for different people. It has to be a consistent way that I have embraced change that I'm going to stick to. If I'm going to go to that class once a week, I got to go to that class. If I'm going to go to that support group twice a week, I got to go to the support group. If I'm going to see that therapist, I need to see them. And addicts tend to think, well, when things are going bad, I don't need better. I don't need all that stuff. But they don't realize that it is a chronic problem like depression, like anxiety. It can return under certain circumstances. So lifelong support in some ways are needed. Um, and this is why I love therapy. I'm a therapist, but this is a lifelong problem. So what are you going to come see me for 30 years? Are you going to pay for therapy? Are you going to racing back every time? There have to be both ways that externally I can get support without just always having to lean on a therapist. And hopefully I grow inside. You might see me for a while, but I'm going to help you find different ways of living. I'm going to help you calm that fear inside of yourself. I'm going to help you find different ways to manage. So, but you got to take that, therapy and treatment aren't really where the work happens. The rubber hits the road when you leave my door. And you have to go deal with it in the world. So one of the things that seeking integrity I am most proud about is that we have developed a community of free stuff. So I probably have 15 to 20 free groups going on every week for betrayed women who don't have kids anymore, for betrayed women who are just in a marriage, for men who are deciding whether they want to stay in the relationship or not, for people who do drugs and sex. And I have therapists who give their time to moderate these groups. They're not therapy groups, but they're just sitting there to make sure people aren't yelling at each other. And so I think for 7 years, maybe longer, for 8 years, I've been doing a weekly group every Monday night. I do it for free. People can come ask questions. We have 14 of those. We have done hundreds, like a podcast, hundreds of webinars with professionals or people in recovery. So I'm a social worker by nature, by training. So I'm very committed to the fact that most people will never go to therapy. Most people will never have the resources that some of us have, but that doesn't mean they can't get the information and get the support. And so I'm part of what is on Seek Integrity. It's a huge section for resources that are free. And you can, by the way, thanks to the internet, you can go from Asia, you can go from China, you can go from anywhere in the world and sit in this group for an hour and just learn or just listen. We teach classes so that people who want to learn about what are the stages of addiction, what is betrayal and how do I deal with it, what is problems with connection, how is porn, you can go through a 6-week class. We support therapy because as a therapist, you may not be able to pull up a whiteboard and say, let me go through this with you, but we can do that. And then we do all the way, and then the work goes all the way to residential treatment, where I run a treatment center where we take 8 or 9 men at a time. It's very much about the focus of the group. They're contained in the sense that they can't just go online, chat with a girlfriend. They can't leave the house and go pick someone. There is a sense of, now they can walk out anytime they want, but there's a lot of peer pressure and a lot of encouragement. And plus, their spouse has sent them there, wouldn't be too happy for them to stay and do the work. And so, residential treatment, 2, 3, 4 weeks, is about going through what you've done, how you've looked at it that was unhealthy, how you can look at it differently, and how you can learn to live differently. And I think people need residential treatment when they've spent years trying and they're not getting anywhere, or when they have co-occurring problems like drug and alcohol problems and they're interacting with each other. I can go to a drug and alcohol center and have a serious cocaine problem. And it's great. We'll do great work on cocaine and recovery and healing. But I'm not going to also tell you where I get the cocaine, which is with the sex worker, and I go to the sex club, so I'm not going to talk about that necessarily in a drug and alcohol center because I'm going to be the perfect. I mean, you're the one who does that. I just drink. We have to provide environments with people I work with where they can look at both. So we can look at alcohol and we can look at drugs and we can look at sex. So there are many, many reasons to be in treatment. The two reasons I think people come the most is that the crisis they're in is so profound that their spouse has said, if you don't do this, I'm going to leave. I would say that most of my referrals are wife driven, because someone is about to lose their relationship, their children, everything that matters to them. And all of a sudden, they realize how important it is to them when they're about to lose it. Um, I do want to say one more thing to you about people coming to treatment, because you mentioned earlier, famous people. Oh, I have a problem and I run to treatment. And of course, well, I don't know if you say, but I say, oh, yeah. So they can turn some crappy, awful behavior, cheating and lying and all this stuff into, I have a problem and I'm going to get help for them. And therefore, we'll feel sorry for them. Because after all, they're not just being an asshole, they actually have problems. Um, the truth is, I don't care why they come to treatment. Whatever gets them in that door, that's where the work starts. And my job is to shift them from, I want to stop because I don't want that bad thing to happen, to I want to stop because I don't want to be this person. And I talk to the men, when you look in the mirror, who do you want to see? Because that matters more than any of it. You can't. So I come in because my wife is saying, I come in because I got in trouble at work. Great, it got you there. But ultimately, how do you want to live your life? And what are your values and your beliefs? And are you living by them or are you not? That's where I'd like them to get to, because no addict unless you're a sociopath, is living the way they believe they should be living. But I'll tell you this, and I want to say this, and by the way, it is seekingintegrity.com. Just to say, it is seekingintegrity.com. That's it. You can find me. You can find information of the podcast. You can find it pretty much anything. You can find all the free groups. You can find me every Monday night online and ask your questions. All of that stuff is on the website. But what I wanted to say that's important to me again as a social worker is, if 95% of the people who go on there get educated and heal and work on themselves, and 5% come to treatment, those 5% pay for everybody else to get it for free. Oh. And that is what means something to me. Okay. I love giving away. Look, and you know this, give away everything you can. We're not going to be here forever, but if I can give something, and I'll tell you the best part of my job, and I'm like, the best part of my job is someone writes me from Japan and they say, I thought I was a deeply sick, perverted person. And then I read your book and I realized I'm just someone who's deeply wounded. I'm just someone who's deeply broken. You know what? I have hope that I could get better now, because you can't get better from being a deeply sleazy, horrible person. You can get better from being a broken person whose behavior has caused them to destroy their lives and other people. So when someone writes me and says, I'll never meet you, I'll never be in therapy with you, I'll never know you, but your words changed my life. And like this podcast, nobody pays us for this. But the influence that we might have the opportunity to help somebody's life, even though we may never meet them, to me, that's the golden part. Well, we should end on that, right? Because what could be better than that, right?
Yeah, beautiful parting thought. Thank you again for taking the time to join me today. And
I am so glad to do so, and so grateful you're doing this.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.